General Zyx'norp of the Galactic Confederation stood before the massive viewscreen, his tentacles twitching with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The blue-green orb of Earth hung in the void before him, looking deceptively peaceful. He cleared his throat sacs and turned to address his fellow alien commanders. "Gentle beings," he gurgled, his translator device struggling to keep up with his rapid-fire clicks and whistles. "We stand on the precipice of history. Today we will finally conquer the last holdout in our glorious empire, the troublesome mudball known as Earth." A chorus of cheers, growls, and what sounded suspiciously like a deflating balloon echoed through the command center. General Zyx'norp raised a tentacle for silence, which was promptly ignored. "As you know," he continued, raising his voice over the din, "our previous attempts to subjugate these humans have been less than successful. An understatement of galactic proportions that their first invasion fleet had been reduced to space dust by a barrage of nuclear weapons. The second had been infected with a computer virus that caused all their ships to play nothing but never gonna give you up on repeat. And the less said about the third attempt, involving an army of genetically engineered space squirrels, the better. But this time Zyx'norp declared, puffing out his chest sacs, "We have the ultimate weapon." He dramatically pulled back a shimmering force field, revealing a pedestal upon which sat a small rectangular object. "Behold," he exclaimed, the human data device known as the smartphone. The assembled alien stared blankly. Sir?" A timid voice piped up from the back. It belonged to Lieutenant Blorp, a gelatinous blob of an alien who had a bad habit of absorbing nearby small objects when nervous. "Isn't that just a communication device?" Zyx'norp's eye stalk swiveled to fix Blorp with a withering glare. "Oh, my dear, sweet, woefully uninformed Blorp. This is so much more than a mere communication device. Our top scientists have studied this technology extensively. It appears to be the human's primary source of entertainment, social interaction, and most importantly, distraction." He began to pace, gesticulating wildly with his tentacles. "Think about it. We've observed humans walking into fountains, off cliffs, and into oncoming traffic while staring at these devices. They ignore their own offspring, their mates, even incoming meteorites. If we can harness this power, we can render the entire human race docile and unaware as we simply walk in and take over." A murmur of excitement rippled through the room. It was quickly followed by the sound of several aliens slapping their appendages against their faces, or nearest face equivalent, as they realized just how low they'd sunk in their desperation to conquer this backwater planet. Now Zyx'norp continued, oblivious to the facepalming occurring around him. "We shall begin our invasion by targeting the most vulnerable and impressionable segment of human society, their young." He manipulated a series of controls, and the viewscreen zoomed in on a colorful structure surrounded by small, screaming creatures. "Behold, a human playground where their larvae gather to engage in primitive physical activities. We shall start here, distributing our weaponized smartphones and—" "Sir," another voice interrupted. This time it was Commander Vrax, a being composed entirely of sentient gas. "We're detecting a massive energy signature from the surface." Zyx'norp's tentacles tied themselves in knots. "What? Impossible. Our stealth systems are impenetrable." "It's not directed at us, sir," Vrax replied, his gaseous form rippling with confusion. "It seems to be emanating from the playground itself." The viewscreen flickered, zooming in further on the colorful structure. As they watched, a group of human children gathered around a strange contraption. It was a circular platform, ringed with handles. "What in the name of the great cosmic squid is that?" Zyx'norp demanded. Lieutenant Blorp, ever helpful, consulted his datapad. "According to our records, sir, it appears to be something called a merry-go-round." They watched in fascinated horror as one child began to spin the device faster and faster, while the others clung to it, screaming with what could only be described as terrified delight. "Great galaxies," Zyx'norp whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. "They're subjecting themselves to extreme centrifugal forces for fun." The alien commander stared in disbelief as children were flung off the spinning death trap, only to stagger to their feet, laughing hysterically, and climb back on for more. Sir, Commander Vrax ventured, his gaseous form condensing slightly in fear. "Perhaps we should reconsider our invasion plans." But Zyx'norp wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on another part of the playground, where a group of smaller humans were climbing a towering metal structure. "What manner of military training is this?" he muttered. Blorp, again consulting his datapad, replied, "It's called a jungle gym, sir. It appears to be designed to improve strength, agility, and problem-solving skills." They watched as one particularly daring child reached the top of the structure, stood up, and promptly jumped off, landing in a pit filled with some kind of grainy substance. "Sand," Blorp supplied helpfully. "They call it a sandbox." Zyx'norp's tentacles were now so tightly knotted that he resembled a sentient ball of yarn. They jumped from great heights into a pit of abrasive particles for amusement. It would seem so, Sir Vrax replied, his gaseous form now swirling in patterns that suggested extreme anxiety. But the horrors were far from over. As they continued to observe, they witnessed children hurling themselves down nearly vertical slopes on thin boards with wheels, swinging on chains high above the ground, and worst of all, engaging in games that involved throwing, catching, and kicking balls at high velocities, often directly at each other. This is madness, Zyx'norp exclaimed, his voice rising to a pitch that shattered several nearby control panels. How can any species survive childhood if this is how they recreate? As if in answer to his question, the view screen suddenly filled with the image of an adult human. The being was tall, bipedal, and wearing some kind of uniform. It approached the playground, and the alien commanders tensed, expecting it to put an end to the chaos. Instead, the adult human pulled out a shrill-sounding device and blew into it. "All right, kids," a booming voice announced. "Recess is over. Time for dodgeball." The resulting cheer from the human children was deafening. "Dodgeball," Zyx'norp stuttered, turning to Blorp for explanation. The gelatinous lieutenant, now visibly quivering, read from his datapad. "A game in which players on two teams try to throw balls at each other while avoiding being hit themselves." There was a moment of stunned silence on the command deck. Then, moving as one, every alien commander turned and began sprinting, or oozing, or floating rapidly towards the escape pods. "Abort the invasion," Zyx'norp shrieked, his tentacles flailing wildly. "Send warnings to the rest of the galaxy. Earth is off limits. I repeat, Earth is off limits." As the commanders scrambled to evacuate, Lieutenant Blorp's voice could be heard over the chaos. "But sir, what about our ultimate weapon? The smartphones?" Zyx'norp paused just long enough to fix Blorp with a look of utter disbelief. "You fool, can't you see? The smartphones were never the weapon. They were the humans' defense against their own insanity. Without them, they might spend even more time engaging in these recreational activities." And with that, the mighty General Zyx'norp, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, dove headfirst into an escape pod, leaving behind the small blue planet that had finally broken his spirit. As the Galactic Confederation fleet retreated in disarray, the children of Earth continued their recess, blissfully unaware of how close they'd come to an alien invasion, or how thoroughly they terrified the would-be conquerors. Little Timmy, age 7, paused in the middle of his 5th consecutive jump from the top of the jungle gym to squint at the sky. "Hey, did anyone else see those weird lights up there?" His friend Sarah, currently hanging upside down from the monkey bars, shrugged as best she could in her inverted position. "Probably just the ice cream truck. Race you to the tetherball court." And off they went, leaving the fate of interstellar relations hanging in the balance of a playground battle. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, General Zyx'norp huddled in his escape pod, rocking back and forth and muttering to himself. The spinning, the jumping, the balls, oh, the humanity. His translator, in a final act of defiance, chose to interpret humanity as insanity. For once, it wasn't entirely wrong. Light years away, in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Confederation, a hush fell over the gathered representatives of 1,000 alien races. The Supreme Chancellor, a being of pure energy contained within a shimmering force field, floated to the center of the room. "Esteemed colleagues," the Chancellor's voice boomed, translated simultaneously into every known language and a few unknown ones. "Just to be safe, we have received an urgent transmission from General Zyx'norp's fleet. It appears their mission to Earth has been less than successful." A chorus of groans, sighs, and what sounded suspiciously like a collective facepalm echoed through the chamber. "Oh, what is it this time?" grumbled Ambassador Zlob of the Galactic Confederation. "Did they fall for another rickroll? Or was it the squirrels again?" The Chancellor's energy form flickered in what might have been interpreted as embarrassment. "I'm afraid it's much worse than that. According to the General's report, once we managed to decipher his hysterical screaming, it seems the humans have developed a form of recreation so terrifying, so mind-bogglingly dangerous, that our forces fled in abject terror." A wave of murmurs swept through the assembly. What could possibly be so frightening that it would send hardened galactic conquerors running for the hills? "Chancellor," a voice called out. It belonged to Dr. Zyx'norp, the Confederation's leading xenobiologist. "Surely you're not suggesting that the humans have developed some kind of new superweapon?" The Chancellor's energy form pulsed with what could only be described as resigned amusement. "Oh no, Dr. Zyx'norp, nothing so mundane. It appears that the humans, and I ask you all to brace yourselves for this, allow their young to engage in activities they call play, which involve voluntary exposure to extreme physical forces, abrasive substances, and high-velocity projectiles. The assembly erupted into chaos. Delegates leapt from their seats, those that had seats anyway shouting in disbelief and horror. Several representatives of more sensitive species fainted on the spot, while others began to emit distress pheromones so potent that the chamber's air filtration system went into emergency overload. Order, order. The Chancellor boomed, its energy form crackling with authority. I know this is difficult to comprehend, but we must approach this situation with calm and rationality. Calm? Rationality? Shrieked Ambassador K. Thex of the Logical Hive Mind Collective, its usually impeccable logic circuits clearly short-circuiting. How can we be calm when faced with a species that treats mortal peril as a form of entertainment? It defies all reason. Dr. Zyx'norp, ever the scientist, raised a tentacle, or possibly an antenna. With Zyx'norp's species, it was often hard to tell. Chancellor, if I may, perhaps we should review the observational data. Surely there must be some explanation for this behavior that doesn't involve mass insanity. The Chancellor nodded, or at least its energy form bobbed in a vaguely affirmative manner, and activated the central holographic display. The assembly watched in horrified fascination as images of human playgrounds flickered to life before them. Children swung from precarious heights, slid down near vertical inclines, spun themselves dizzy on whirling contraptions, and hurled themselves and various objects through the air with reckless abandon. All the while, adult humans stood by, occasionally offering encouragement or bandaging minor wounds, but generally allowing the chaos to unfold. Great cosmic amoeba, whispered Ambassador Zyx'norp, his gelatinous form quivering with each new revelation. It's like they're training an army of miniature daredevils. Precisely, exclaimed Dr. Zyx'norp, smacking one appendage against another in a gesture of scientific excitement. Don't you see? This must be how humans prepare their young for the rigors of their hostile world. By exposing them to controlled danger at an early age, they build resilience and adaptability. The assembly considered this for a moment. It was, after all, a somewhat logical explanation for what appeared to be mass voluntary child endangerment. But what about the games? Asked a small, timid voice from the back of the chamber. It belonged to Junior Delegate Squish, attending their first galactic assembly. The general's report mentioned something called Dodgeball. Dr. Zyx'norp's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Ah yes, that particular activity does seem to push the boundaries of rational behavior. From what we've observed, it appears to be a ritualized form of combat training, in which young humans pelt each other with spherical projectiles while attempting to avoid being struck themselves. You mean, gasped Ambassador K. Thex, its logic circuits now emitting a faint smoke. They willingly subject themselves to high-speed impacts for fun. Indeed, the Chancellor confirmed, its energy form dimming slightly in what might have been interpreted as resigned acceptance. And that's not even the worst of it. Our intelligence reports indicate the existence of even more extreme forms of recreation, activities with names like paintball, skateboarding, and something truly terrifying called extreme ironing. A collective shudder ran through the assembly. So what are we to do? Asked Ambassador Zyx'norp, voicing the question on everyone's mind, or minds in the case of the hive mind species. How can we possibly hope to interact with, let alone conquer, a species that treats danger as a playground? The Chancellor's energy form pulsed thoughtfully. I believe, esteemed colleagues, that we must face an uncomfortable truth. The humans, with their baffling ability to not only survive but thrive in the face of constant peril, may be more formidable than we ever imagined. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the implications of this statement sank in. Are you suggesting we abandon our plans for galactic domination? Squish ventured, their voice barely above a whisper. The Chancellor's form flickered with what might have been a sigh. I'm suggesting, young Squish, that perhaps it's time we considered a different approach. If the humans can turn danger into a source of joy and growth, maybe there's something we can learn from them. This statement was met with a mixture of shocked gasps, incredulous laughter, and more than a few skeptical snorts, from those species capable of snorting anyway. Learn from them. Ambassador K. Thex exclaimed, its logic circuits now in full meltdown mode. What could we possibly learn from a species that considers ring around the rosy an appropriate activity for children, given its clear references to historical pandemics? Dr. Zyx'norp, ever the voice of scientific reason, interjected. Actually, that's a common misconception. The nursery rhyme's connection to the plague is largely— Not now, Doctor, the Chancellor interrupted, its energy form crackling with impatience. The point is, the humans have demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt, to find joy in adversity, and to prepare their young for an unpredictable universe. These are qualities that could benefit us all. The assembly buzzed with murmurs of reluctant consideration. It was, after all, a compelling argument. "So what do you propose, Chancellor?" Ambassador Zyx'norp asked, his gelatinous form rippling with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. The Chancellor's energy form brightened, expanding to fill more of the room. "I propose a new initiative, my fellow beings. Instead of conquest, let us embark on a mission of cultural exchange." A stunned silence fell over the assembly, broken only by the sound of Ambassador Thex's logic circuits finally giving up and shutting down with a pitiful whine. "Cultural exchange," Squish repeated, their small voice filled with equal parts excitement and terror. "You mean we should try to play with the humans?" The Chancellor's form pulsed in what could only be described as enthusiastic agreement. "Precisely, young Squish. Imagine the advancements we could make if we could harness even a fraction of the human's resilience and adaptability." Dr. Zyx'norp, already scribbling notes furiously, chimed in. "The potential for scientific breakthroughs is enormous. If we could understand how humans transform fear into excitement, pain into growth, why, we could revolutionize everything from military training to recreational activities across the galaxy." The assembly burst into a cacophony of voices, each species trying to wrap their various appendages, or lack thereof, around this radical new proposal. But how would we even begin?" Ambassador Zyx'norp sputtered, his gelatinous form quivering with a mix of fear and anticipation. "Our previous attempts at infiltration have been less than successful." He glanced meaningfully at the still smoking remains of Ambassador Thex's logic circuits. The Chancellor's energy form swirled thoughtfully. "We'll need to take a subtle approach. No more invasion fleets or genetically engineered space squirrels." A collective groan of embarrassment rippled through the chamber at the mention of that particular fiasco. Instead, the Chancellor continued, "We'll send a small team of our bravest volunteers. They'll immerse themselves in human culture, starting with these playgrounds we've observed. Who'll learn the ways of tag, unravel the mysteries of hopscotch, and yes, even brave the terrifying realm of dodgeball." Rain. A gasp of awe, and more than a little fear, echoed through the chamber. "Chancellor," Dr. Zyx'norp interjected, his scientific curiosity clearly overriding his sense of self-preservation, "I volunteered to lead this expedition. My shape-shifting ability should allow me to blend in seamlessly with the human young." The Chancellor's form flickered with what might have been amusement. "Ah, Dr. Zyx'norp, your enthusiasm is admirable, but perhaps we should start with something a bit less conspicuous. After all, we wouldn't want a repeat of the sandbox incident." The doctor's many eyes blinked in embarrassment, remembering the unfortunate event where he'd attempted to disguise himself as a sand castle, only to be liberated by a well-meaning child with a bucket and shovel. "No," the Chancellor mused, "we need someone who can observe without drawing attention. Someone small, unobtrusive, yet capable of detailed data collection." All eyes and various other sensory organs in the chamber turned slowly towards junior delegate Squish, who suddenly felt very, very small indeed. "Me," Squish squeaked, their tiny form trembling. "But I'm just a junior delegate. I've never even been on a first contact mission, let alone—" "Exactly," the Chancellor exclaimed, its energy form brightening with excitement. "You're young, adaptable, and most importantly, you're roughly the same size as your human child's favorite plaything, the teddy bear." Squish's eyes widened in horror as understanding dawned. "You want me to disguise myself as a stuffed animal?" "Precisely," Dr. Zyx'norp chimed in, already sketching out designs for a bear-shaped exosuit. "With your natural squishiness and my ingenious disguise, you'll be the perfect undercover agent. You can experience human play firsthand, gather invaluable data, and report back to us without raising suspicion." The assembly buzzed with excitement. It was a bold plan, fraught with danger and the potential for intergalactic embarrassment, but it was also their best chance at understanding the baffling species known as humans. "Well, Squish?" the Chancellor prompted, its energy form focused intently on the small, quivering delegate. "Will you accept this most important mission? For the sake of galactic understanding and the advancement of playground science." Squish looked around the chamber, seeing the hopeful, and in some cases, slightly amused, faces of the assembled delegates. They took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage in their tiny, squishy body. I accept," Squish declared, their voice only cracking slightly. "For the good of the galaxy, I will become the undercover teddy bear." The assembly erupted in cheers and a few poorly suppressed chuckles. Operation Playground Infiltration was officially underway. As the delegates dispersed, chattering excitedly about the potential outcomes of this daring mission, Squish couldn't help but feel a mix of terror and exhilaration. They were about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime, facing dangers untold and hardships unnumbered in the treacherous terrain of human recreation. Little did Squish know that their greatest challenge wouldn't be the high-flying swings or the dizzying merry-go-rounds. No, the true test would come in the form of a pigtailed little girl named Susie, with a penchant for hosting the most perilous tea parties this side of the Crab Nebula. But that, dear readers, is a story for another day. 6 Earth months later, the Galactic Confederation reconvened for Squish's much-anticipated report. The chamber was packed, with delegates from every corner of the galaxy eager to hear about the mysterious world of human play. As Squish waddled to the center of the room, still wearing the slightly worse-for-wear teddy bear costume, a hush fell over the assembly. The small delegate cleared their throat, or whatever passed for a throat in their species, and began. Esteemed colleagues, I stand before you today a changed being. I have swung from great heights, slid down perilous inclines, and yes, I have even survived the dreaded Dodgeball. But more than that, I have learned the true meaning of play. The assembly leaned in, hanging on every word. Play, my friends, is not just about danger or developing survival skills. It's about joy, creativity, and connection. It's about learning to laugh in the face of fear, to pick yourself up when you fall, and to find wonder in the simplest of things. Squish's eyes misted over, an impressive feat for a being without tear ducts, as they continued. I've been squeezed, dropped, dragged through mud, and yes, even tea-partied within an inch of my life. But I've also been loved, comforted, and included in the most magnificent adventures imaginable. The chamber was silent, every being present deeply moved by Squish's words. And so Squish concluded, drawing themselves up to their full, if still rather diminutive height. I propose that instead of fearing the humans or attempting to conquer them, we should strive to learn from them. Let us bring the spirit of play to every corner of our vast confederation. For a moment there was silence. Then, starting with a slow clap from Dr. Gristect, impressive given his lack of conventional hands, the chamber erupted into thunderous applause. As the cheers echoed through the hall, the Chancellor's energy form expanded, filling the room with a warm, approving glow. Well done, Squish, it said, its voice filled with pride. You've opened our eyes to a new way of seeing the universe. From this day forward, let it be known that Earth is not a planet to be conquered, but a planet to be celebrated. And so, dear readers, that is how a small, squishy alien in a teddy bear costume changed the course of galactic history. From that day forward, playgrounds began popping up on planets across the Confederation. Alien children, and more than a few adults, discovered the joys of swings, slides, and yes, even the occasional game of dodgeball. As for Earth, well, if you've ever noticed a teddy bear watching your child's soccer game with just a bit too much interest, or a stuffed animal taking suspiciously detailed notes during a playground scuffle, just smile and wave. After all, intergalactic peace may just depend on your kid's killer dodgeball skills. Or is it just the beginning of a whole new kind of space race?